Hello everyone. In today's video I bring you a story that will give you goosebumps. Let's meet Sister Abigail Morgan, a nun who had a near-death experience and came back with shocking revelations about the church after the Pope's death. What she saw on the other side will change everything you believe. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and comment below which city you are watching. Now get ready for a journey that will stir your soul. My name is Sister Abigail Morgan. I have 58 years, and until recently, I was just another anonymous nun living in a small convent in Charleston, Carolina do Sul. My life was governed by faith in God, faith in the church, faith in the vows I made at a young age. Poverty, chastity, and obedience were my foundations. I believed I was serving the divine will. That was before. Before the day when God, or something much greater, tore the veil from my eyes and showed me what no sermon, no catechism ever dared tell. It was a cloudy morning when it all started. I was driving towards another convent to deliver medicine. My fingers absent-mindedly ran over the rosary beads while my lips murmured familiar prayers. It was then that, out of nowhere, a speeding truck crossed a red light. I didn't have time to divert. The sound of impact was the last echo of earth I heard. When I opened my eyes, it was no longer in my body. I floated above the scene of the accident, observing my motionless body among twisted hardware. Around me, the world seemed frozen in an unearthly calm. That's when I saw three beings of light made of an energy so pure that my eyes, or my soul, could barely bear it. They didn't need to speak. I just felt inside me. They came to get me, but also to show me something. You have sincerely sought the truth, Abigail. Now you will see what has been hidden. The words vibrated directly into my spirit. I was enveloped by a light so intense that I felt every layer of my soul being laid bare. And that's when everything changed. I saw the church. But not the church of masses, songs, promises of salvation. I saw what she hid in the depths: lies, manipulations, spiritual corruption. And at the center of this revelation, an image, the tired face of Pope Francis. When he leaves, the walls will fall, said one of the beings. The hidden truth will come to light. Nothing can stop it. I saw, and now the whole world starts to see it too. Because today, Pope Francis is already gone. And with his death, what has been sealed for centuries is slowly emerging. I'm not telling this to be heard. I'm telling you because the time has come. I was led through a golden spiral that seemed endless. The walls of this tunnel were made of living light, pulsing as if the universe itself was breathing around me. I felt every atom of who I was being undone and remade with each beat of that luminous vibration. There was no fear, just an irresistible call to go deeper. On the other side, an immense golden plane appeared, a space without floor, without ceiling, without time. It was as if I were within the very heart of existence. In the center of this infinity, a colossal structure floated. A gigantic book made of light and shadow whose pages turned by themselves, each one filled with a story forgotten by humanity. One of the beings of light stepped forward and, without words, touched my consciousness. And then I saw it. I saw everything. I saw the first centuries of the church, the councils that decided behind closed walls which truths would be permitted and which would be buried forever. I saw how over the centuries dogmas were shaped not to free souls, but to keep them prisoners of guilt, fear, submission. I saw hidden documents beneath the Vatican, books that revealed that the divine was not a distant throne in the sky, but a living flame within every human being. I felt a sharp grip on my soul. Everything I believed in, everything I lived for was just a pale shadow of the true light. And then, in the midst of these devastating visions, he appeared. Pope Francis. His face appeared before me, shrouded in twilight light. His eyes carried sadness, not only for the approaching death but for the guilt of the secrets he knew and could not, or did not dare, reveal. When he falls, whispered the light inside me, the veil will fall. The dark corridors will be illuminated, and the world will see the rot hidden beneath the golden altars. His death, it wasn't just the end of a life. It was the breaking of a spiritual wall built over millennia. I was shaking, not from fear, but from something even greater. The awareness that the greatest robbery in the history of humanity was not of land nor of gold, it was of the inner light of each soul. And now the wall had begun to crack. The revelation passed through me like a sword of fire. The church was not just a flawed institution. It was a prison, built with the stones of fear and the chains of blind obedience. And liberation finally began to appear on the horizon. After the revelation about what was hidden beneath the history of the church, I felt my spirit being pulled to another place. Not by the strength of beings of light, but as if it were the truth itself calling me deeper. I crossed the golden plain, and before me something unexpected appeared. A colossal structure made of black stone and vivid shadows. It was like an inverted cathedral, an invisible prison built behind the scenes of faith. I entered. The air was heavy, filled with centuries of clotted fear. The walls made of echoes, muffled cries, unheard prayers, silent screams of souls who had been convinced of their unworthiness. Inside that labyrinth, I saw rows and rows of trapped consciousnesses. People who had lived and died believing they would never be worthy of God, who needed mediators, rituals, eternal penances to achieve something that, in truth, had always lived inside them. Every soul that passed before me carried wrought chains of guilt, and I realized, horrified, these chains were not placed by God. They were built by men, by those who claimed to speak in the name of light. I felt my spirit shake. A part of me wanted to scream, wanted to rip those chains off one by one, but I understood that chains could only be broken from the inside out. Each soul needed to first realize that it was free. The labyrinth stretched without end, corridors and more corridors of souls sedated by guilt, by the fear of hell, by the idea that God was a distant judge, not a living fire inside each chest. And then I saw something even more devastating. In the center of the labyrinth, locked behind golden gates studded with sacred symbols, were a gigantic safe. Within it, I saw glimpses of what was hidden. Ancient manuscripts that spoke of the divine as something innate and free, not mediated by churches. Accounts of mystical experiences that taught that there was no separation between God and creature. Letters, suppressed gospels, evidence that the story told by the altars was only a small fraction, carefully edited, of humanity's true spiritual heritage. They took the light and hid it, whispered a luminous voice in my mind. But not every vault can contain the sun forever. And I knew. The Pope's death was the key that would unlock the first gate. Not immediately, not without resistance, but the rupture had begun. And nothing could stop her. The shadowy structure would shake. What was suppressed would return like a flood. And the world would never be the same. While I was still wandering the halls of that cathedral of shadows, something began to change. The ground beneath my feet, if it could be called a ground, began to vibrate. The walls, once heavy and oppressive, began to disintegrate like dust carried by the wind. I was enveloped by the light again. But this time, it was not an external light coming from the beings that accompanied me. It was a light that appeared inside me. I remained motionless, suspended in the golden void as the light within grew. It was as if a long-dormant flame was finally being released, consuming centuries of layers of fear, submission, and smallness. I heard or felt a truth so simple and so powerful that it tore me into silent tears. You are made of the same substance as God. You are light. You always were. I felt this truth reverberate in every spark of my being. And then I understood. The greatest crime of the structure I called a spiritual house was teaching us that we are separate from God, that we need intermediaries, rituals, penances, that we are unworthy, small, sinful by nature. This lie robbed us of our greatest inheritance, the awareness that God pulses within each of us, that we do not need to beg for divine love, because we are a living expression of that love. There, in that infinite space, I saw the tragic irony. Millions, billions of souls have spent their lives searching outside for what was always inside, and I understood that this is the real prison. Not stone walls, but beliefs that teach us to distrust the very light we carry. This revelation was so immense, so overwhelming, that I felt as if my soul was breaking, not with pain but with release. I cried. I cried for lives spent in darkness. I cried for the souls still trapped in the nets of fear. I cried for myself, for the blind faith that fed me and at the same time blinded me. But I also cried with gratitude, because now I knew I was free, and I always have been. The light within me shone so brightly that the void itself was transformed, and before me, the beings of light reappeared. They smiled. Speechless, his eyes said, "Now you saw it, Abigail. Now you remember." And at that moment I realized awakening is not a miracle reserved for a few. It's everyone's right. It's everyone's nature. And the time of remembrance had arrived. The light that now pulsed within me seemed to expand everything that I was. There were no longer any boundaries between what was me and what was the universe. Everything was just one breath. And then, as if space itself had a will, a new vision began to form before my spiritual eyes. I saw the earth, not as we know it, but as a living tapestry of connected consciousnesses. A dark web hovered over her, made of fear, guilt, and control. A web that had been patiently woven for centuries, interweaving institutions, beliefs, traditions, manipulating what people saw, felt, and expected from life and from God. At the center of this web, I saw the image of a monumental basilica, its golden splendor overshadowing the rot hidden in its foundations. Then I saw the moment that everything began to change, the day of the Pope's death. It was as if a central cord was cut. I saw shockwaves run through the dark web, cracks appearing in invisible patterns, like a mirror cracking in slow motion. At first, everything seemed to remain the same. The masses continued, the faithful cried, the cardinal spoke of hope and renewal. But in the invisible, in the deep invisible, the cracks widened. Secret documents began to leak, not just from the Vatican, but from unimaginable places. Ancient monasteries, hidden archives, forgotten diaries of suppressed saints and prophets. And more than documents, spiritual truths began to sprout directly into people's hearts. I saw ordinary men and women waking up from strange dreams, seeing visions, hearing inner callings they couldn't explain. Simple people from all corners of the world beginning to question what they previously accepted without thinking. I saw churches becoming empty. I saw priests trying to calm crowds, but their words sounded hollow. I saw ancient spiritual leaders trying to reinforce the old dogmas, but the spell had been broken. The time of blind faith was coming to an end, and in its place something new began to be born. Not a new stone temple, but a free, living consciousness, connected directly to the source. I saw lights lighting up in people's hearts like torches in a long night. It was not an apocalypse of destruction. It was an apocalypse of revelation. The word apocalypse echoed in my mind, but not as a synonym for the end, but rather as its true meaning, revelation. That was what was starting. An era of open eyes. A new spiritual era, born not of the authority of the few over the many, but of the truth pulsing within each awakening soul. And at that moment I understood. Everything I was shown was not a prediction. It was a promise. And it was already coming true. As the vision of the old structures collapsed, dissolved before me, a new image began to emerge. In the golden void, I saw a seed. Small, fragile, but pulsing with a force that seemed capable of moving worlds. It was a seed of light. At first it seemed lonely, lost in the ashes of what had been destroyed. But then, before my spiritual eyes, the seed began to germinate. Roots of pure energy silently spread across the earth, not in temples, not in palaces, but in humble hearts, in silent homes, in souls that had never set foot in a cathedral. And I understood, with painful clarity, God never inhabited the cold stones of sacred buildings. He has always inhabited living hearts, and it was there that the new era would begin, and it was already beginning. I saw simple women and men feeling the divine presence not through imposed rituals, but in everyday gestures. A touch, a look, a silent prayer in the middle of work, an unexpected tear in the face of the beauty of life. True spirituality, which has been suppressed for so long, reborn in silence. No dogmas, no guilt, no fear. A spirituality that said, "You are already worthy. You are already part of the source. You were never apart." And even more profoundly, I saw that this new light would not come through charismatic leaders or new religions. There would be no new Vatican, no new Pope, no new hierarchy. The new light would be silent, scattered, invisible to eyes that seek power, but luminous to those that seek love. It was a slow birth, like the dawn that breaks the darkness without fanfare. And at the same time, it was a painful birth because the old man would resist. The dark structure would try to pull itself together, try to build new golden prisons. But the flame of memory, once lit, does not go out. And I saw it. I saw this flame passing through generations. I saw children being born with a living memory of who they are. I saw old people finding at the end of their lives a freedom they never thought possible. I saw a future where it would no longer be necessary to teach that we are light. People would just know. A humanity that walks not on its knees in the face of fear, but with your head held high before the infinite light you carry within you. And at that moment I realized, everything I was shown was not just to be seen, it was to be remembered, and at the right time, shared. While I was still contemplating the vision of the new light being born on earth, I felt a gentle change around me. The golden vibration that surrounded me began to thicken, to take shape, and as before, the three beings of light appeared before me. But this time there was something different about his presence. It wasn't just love. It was a calling. They approached, and without the need for words, the message was imprinted directly on my consciousness, so clear and so powerful that I could barely bear it. You saw. You remembered. Now you must carry this truth in the silence of your being. It was not a burden of evangelization. It was not a conversion mission. It was something subtler and more sacred. Be a living testimony. The world will need souls who remember the light when structures collapse, when fear tries to take over, when doubt hangs in the air like dust after the walls fall. You will be one of them. I felt a wave of deep humility. I so small, so insignificant, so full of mistakes and doubts. How could I carry something so immense? And then the light within me responded, in overwhelming tenderness. You don't have to be perfect. It just needs to be true. I saw, as in flashes, the moments that would come. Confused looks, unanswered questions, broken hearts searching for meaning in the midst of spiritual rubble. I saw people desperately seeking new structures, new saviors. And I understood. My role would not be to offer new ready-made answers, but keep alive the memory that the truth does not live outside, lives inside, always lived. Be a lighted lamp, they said, not a new prison. My tears floated in the golden space, and for the first time since the beginning of the experience, I felt a thread of longing tighten my being. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to leave that home made of light and truth. I didn't want to move away from the silent music that pulsed in every atom of the afterlife. But I understood that coming back was part of love. And then, with the gentleness of those who seal an eternal pact, the beings of light bowed before me, not as superiors but as ancient brothers saying goodbye. Remember, Abigail, what you saw is real, and the time has come. And in the next instant I felt a pull, not a brutal gesture, but an irresistible call to return. The journey was coming to an end. But the real mission was just beginning. Crossing back into the body was like trying to breathe through thick water. The infinite light became more distant, like the sunset fading over the horizon of a desert. My being which there, in the golden expanse, was light and limitless, began to feel heavy, compressed, squeezed into a small and limited form. It was like being pushed into a cocoon of flesh. The first sensation was pain. Not just physical, although my body ached as if it had been stitched back to life, but a deep spiritual pain. The pain of being separated again from that inexhaustible source of pure love. I opened my eyes slowly. The physical world welcomed me with its cold light, its beeping machines, its disconnected sounds. The white ceiling of the hospital seemed lifeless compared to the living tapestry I had seen on the other side. For a moment, I wanted to close my eyes and go back, returning to the real home where the truth didn't need to be explained, where light was everything, but he knew he couldn't. I had chosen to return, and along with that choice came the weight, an invisible weight, silent but crushing. I knew now. He knew what most didn't yet know. He knew that the Pope's death was not just a loss for the Church. It was the sign that the wall had begun to collapse, that humanity's greatest spiritual secret was on the verge of being revealed, not by force, but by inevitability. And more than that, I knew that true divine connection, free from intermediaries, was awakening like fire beneath the earth. I closed my eyes and cried. I cried for the world that was still sleeping. I cried for those who would try to cling to the ruins of the old temple. I cried for lost innocence on mine and so many others, but I also cried with gratitude, because I had touched the source, and even back in the flesh, that flame would never be extinguished within me. In that hospital room with tubes in my arms and monitors around me, I realized I was a stranger in my own world. What had come was not a punishment. It was a silent call to carry light in the darkness. Not to preach, not to convince, just to be. Be a living reminder, even in silence, that divinity does not live in cathedrals, does not live in memorized words, does not live on golden altars. It lives in the heart of every being who dares to remember who they are. And I, Abigail Morgan, had remembered. The days that followed were silent, almost unreal. Outside, the world continued its course. News about the Pope's death filled the news. Masses were celebrated. Hymns echoed in ancient basilicas. The farewell ritual. But inside me it was a different story. I had already crossed what they didn't even know existed yet. I had already seen what they had not yet dared to imagine. Walking among them was like living between two worlds. First, the visible world of rules, hierarchies, dogmas, and fears disguised as faith. The second, the invisible world, the one that now pulsed inside me like a hidden sun. And the distance between the two worlds was immense. There were moments when I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake people by their clothes and say, "Yud Tai are free, always have been. The true temple is within you." But the wisdom that was given to me in the light told me something else. It's not through shouting that seeds bloom. It is because of the patient silence of the earth. So I retreated. In silence, he watched. I saw priests repeat automatic prayers, their empty words resonating against icy walls. I saw believers kneel in fear, not in love. I saw faded eyes seeking redemption where it was never lost. And every scene was a silent stab. I was among them, but I was no longer theirs. My spirit walked on another frequency, like a dissonant note in an old song that no longer made sense. But along with this immense loneliness, there was also something new. A serenity that could not be taken away. A peace that did not depend on acceptance, recognition, or applause. A peace that came from the source, the same one that I now knew lived within me. I started to notice something subtle. A few glances among the crowd sometimes met mine. Looks that seemed to ask in silence, "Do you also feel like something has changed?" And in those looks, I found hope. I wasn't entirely alone. Others in silence also began to wake up. It was not a noisy revolution. It was an invisible web, woven from the inside out, soul by soul, heart by heart, and even in solitude a certainty sustained me. The light that awakens one soul is enough to illuminate the path of 1,000 others. As the days dragged on, a truth grew inside me, as inevitable as the sunrise. There was no turning back. I was no longer Sister Abigail, who once believed with her eyes closed in the authority of the altars. I was now just Abigail, a being of light walking in the fragile skin of a human body. My mission was not to save anyone. It wasn't about building new churches or launching inflammatory manifestos. My mission was to live as an invisible beacon, to be a silent reminder that the light was never out, that freedom was never taken away, that God was never far away. It was a subtle and at the same time absolute call, being truthful in a world that still clings to lies, love in a world that still fears being free. And I accepted. I accepted the spiritual loneliness that would come. I accepted the heavy silence that would sometimes suffocate me. I accepted walking among those who would mock, reject, or not understand. Because the light I saw cannot be unseen, and the love I touched cannot be denied, I understood that my life from that point on would be a living prayer, not made of words but of presence. Every look, every gesture, every step I took would be a seed sown in the invisible soil of the human spirit. And even if no one saw, even if no one knew, the seeds would blossom. Because the light within every human being is just dormant, not dead. I closed my eyes one last time in that hospital room, and in silence, I made my vow. I won't forget. I won't hide. I will not fear. I will be a flame, however small, in the long night of memory. When I opened my eyes, a single tear ran down my face. It wasn't a tear of pain. It was a tear of acceptance, of courage, of love. The old world trembled. The new dawn was approaching, and I, Abigail Morgan, was ready to walk through the wreckage, not as someone who has lost faith, but as someone who has finally found the source. The true light. The light that can never be hidden again. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.